Okay. Okay. So this is pretty much how I live. This is how I communicate with everyone, is over Zoom calls. So this is just an extension of my existence. If I could just upload myself into Zoom's servers, it would be a lot less effort to maintain a physical body. Just because as a solutions architect, I'm pretty much on calls all day long. So anyway, all sarcasm aside, looks like sharing my screen and we're recording. So without further ado, here tonight virtually to talk about GitLab, both as, see what I mean? No sooner do I start talking, but I get a notification. Okay, let's close that out. Telegram, no less. Okay. So now that I think every device I own is now in D&D mode, Noah asked me to come and address the group tonight to talk about GitLab. We are a unique player in the software development space. We're unique in a few different aspects, and we'll kind of get into that. So who am I? My name's Eric, the IT guy. If you've listened to Noah's show, you've probably heard my name thrown around, usually in sarcastic tones. So, but I am a solutions architect for GitLab. So I am basically a sales engineer. I work with customers, talk through what their pain points are, and kind of help figure out where GitLab can help improve their current workflows or even replace some of their older systems. I do a little bit of gaming. I've co-hosted a couple of times on a couple of different podcasts. And then I've been fairly active the last few years in the open source community. I've been traveling to a number of different conferences this year, giving talks. Before that, I volunteered with the Ask Noah Show, the GNOME Foundation, Jupiter Broadcasting, and it seems like there's one other that I'm forgetting. But I've worked with a bunch of different groups. Oh, I was a big advocate for PeerTube for a while, unofficially. I don't think they know I exist, but kind of talked about that. Talked about their platform quite a bit, and got a couple of different organizations using it. So that's who I am, and that's what we're going to talk about. So, what is GitLab? GitLab, the company. There's also GitLab, the product. So GitLab the product is a single application for the entire software development lifecycle. And what that means is, instead of maintaining multiple servers and multiple different, completely disparate, completely separate applications, GitLab is one application stack. It's built on Ruby on Rails, and it handles everything from project management to issues to CI/CD pipelines to security scanning and monitoring. And we'll kind of dive into what each of those look like in the demo portion. So fun fact, that is not actually a fox logo, that's a Tanuki. And a Tanuki is a Japanese raccoon dog. The Tanuki was picked because they are very intelligent animals, and they work in a group to achieve a common goal. So you often see Tanukis traveling together, and they work together to establish a food source or something along those lines, which ironically is one of the driving factors behind GitLab, the company. So the Gitlab Way is basically, our mission is to change all creative work from read-only to read-write. When everyone can contribute, consumers become contributors, and we greatly increase the rate of human progress. So GitLab's mission is very similar to that of the open source community. If your code base is open, then other people can actually look at it and learn from it and contribute to it and help improve it. So you see faster development, you see better applications, you see more secure applications, and you can you build it as a community instead of as an individual or as a silo. So GitLab, the company, is misunderstood quite a bit in the industry. A lot of that stems from some naming collision. people hear GitLab and immediately try and make the connection between GitLab and GitHub. So there's actually there's no relationship there. GitHub is actually a direct competitor of ours. And now that GitHub is part of kind of the Azure stack, Azure, GitHub, and some of the other tools that Microsoft is acquiring and implementing into their cloud solution are direct competitors for GitLab. So I've heard that we're an extension of GitHub. I've heard that we're in kind of an engine that's built on top of GitHub. So GitLab is a very misunderstood company, which is really a shame, because before I worked at GitLab, I was a big fan of the company and the product, and that's because GitLab is an open core company. So our product is open core, and the culture around that product has kind of become open core. with this idea of collaboration in mind, GitLab is all remote. We have over 710 employees in somewhere above 60 different countries spread across the entire globe. And ever since GitLab, the company, was founded, it's been all remote all the time. So the distinction there that has to be made is a lot of remote companies right now have a central location. They have a central office, and then they have satellite offices, or even remote employees or consultants or contractors that are brought in to do very specific tasks. But there's still kind of that home base. There's that one location you can drive to. It's a brick and mortar building. GitLab doesn't have that. GitLab's official mailing address is actually the apartment of the CEO in San Francisco. So there is no central office. I made the joke at the beginning of the presentation that GitLab really exists in Zoom. We have a presence on Slack, on Zoom, on GitLab.com, which is our online presence. We've got a SaaS solution, so it's multi-tenant. It's a single instance of GitLab, and that's the only place that the company really exists. We've got people in the United States. We've got people in South America. We've got people in Europe, Africa, Australia. I mean, GitLab is unique in that aspect. So GitLab, the product, is built on Ruby on Rails, and I think a lot of the newer microservices are written in Go. There's over 100,000 different entities that use GitLab. And last I checked, there were over 2,200 contributors to our product. So GitLab, the product, has two different versions. There's GitLab CE and GitLab EE, and that's Community Edition and Enterprise Edition. So the Community Edition is completely open source. You can go out to GitLab.com and you can look up GitLab. GitLab engineering likes to talk about, we use GitLab to build GitLab. So we use our issue boards to track features and bugs. We use our security scanning tools to make sure that our software is secure. We use our built-in monitoring tools to monitor the application. So we use GitLab to build GitLab. So the Community Edition, you can actually go out to GitLab.com, look up the project, and you can actually go out, contribute not only to the code, but to the documentation, to the company handbook, which we'll talk about here in just a few minutes. But over 2,200 people since 2011 have contributed to the open source project. So that means that you figure a company of 700, maybe 200 or so of those are actually full-time engineers that work on the application day in and day out. So over 2,000 people that have contributed features or bugs or documentation or the like are not even getting paid or work for GitLab, the company. Something else that's interesting about GitLab, the product, is we release on the 22nd of every month, and have done so for consecutively for over 90 months in a row. And we just released version 12.0 about 6 days ago. So we've kind of been talking about GitLab, the company, and GitLab, the product, but they share a similar mentality. So the product and the project, or the company and the product both share this this idea of being transparent, of being collaborative, and those form kind of the basis of our core values. So GitLab values are credit. There's collaboration, results, efficiency, diversity, iteration, and transparency. So that spells out credit. So collaboration is this idea of taking your team members, so the actual people that wear GitLab badge, so to speak, taking your community contributors, taking your customer base, taking people that work on open source projects that help that serve as pillars for GitLab, and putting them all in a position where they can communicate with each other. In fact, some of our top contributors were invited to the company conference in New Orleans a few weeks ago. Excuse me. And GitLab is starting GitLab. The name just changed. I forget what it's called, but they're basically mini customer conferences. There'll be one in New York and one in London over the next couple of months, where customers can get together and kind of workshop and brainstorm together about how they're using GitLab, how they're doing software development. So it's a chance for GitLab to get some feedback, but it's a chance for customers to kind of network together, and that's not something you see very often in the industry today. So the next value is results. So for the first time in my career, I actually don't have to keep a timesheet. I'm not glued to this 40-hour work week. That's kind of my target. But I mean, my efforts are really result driven. So if I've got 5 customers that I'm talking to that week, and they're going to have a discovery call where we talk about their environment. We're going to have a demonstration call where I'm talking about our product, and then usually there is a proof of concept or a trial kickoff, and some technical questions and some licensing questions during that process. So I could have, per customer, I could have 5 different touch points in a week, but so some weeks I may have 8, other times I may have 2. It just really depends on the flow. How many customers I'm working with. But then at the same time, GitLab values continuous learning. So I'm always learning something new. And right now I'm working through some Linux Academy courses on Kubernetes. And here in the near future, I'm going to be working through Ansible. So if I'm not talking to customers, I'm usually brushing up on my knowledge of GitLab to product. If I'm not working on that, I'm learning something new. I'm looking at trends in the marketplace. I'm looking at where technology is going. I'm learning new sales strategies, so that I can actually know how to talk to customers and identify what their problems are and work towards potential solutions. And those may encompass all of the GitLab tool, or it may only encompass 1 or 2 of the phases. So it's very much results driven. You're actually you work remote full time. And you have unlimited PTO. I kind of have the option to come and go as I please. So I've got 2 kids, and then my girlfriend and I have her daughter full time. So there's anywhere between 1 and 4 kids in our household at any one time. So it's really nice. Like today, I had a customer call at 2, but before that, we went out to the pool here at our apartment complex and swam for 30 minutes, and it was really freeing and really helps my efficiency to be able to take those breaks, spend it with my family, or take time for myself, to go to the gym, or somehow just take care of life. And then that kind of ties into the next value of efficiency. So GitLab values efficiency. We want to find the most boring solution. We want to find out what just works and go with that solution first, instead of trying out multiple different things and trying out different solutions. We just want to find one that works and go with that. And the results and efficiency are kind of joined at the hip there, and really builds the culture in which we're able to work asynchronously across the globe. So one of the other values that we have is diversity. So being an all remote global company, we have the ability to not just pool from one metropolitan area. So I'm based out of Kansas City, and companies that are headquartered here and rely heavily on their brick and mortar facilities are really only tied to Kansas City and the surrounding areas. You can't get much more than 90-minute commute before people aren't going to make that time commitment to your company. So your pool is very small. But if you're global and you're all remote, then we've got people from all over the country, all over the globe, that from all different cultural backgrounds, from all different walks of life, all different industries, all kinds of different technical backgrounds, all coming together to work on GitLab as a team. So we've got diversity of thought and diversity of effort. And then iteration is the next choice. One of the major problems that faces IT right now is this problem with being obsessed with planning out every little detail before you actually start a project. And if you've started a project for school or started a project for work, you know that you can plan all you want. But the moment that you actually start the work, you know that plan, you just basically throw it away, because things change, variables change, your time frame changes, the idea that you want to follow to the ideas that you want to follow. If say you're writing a paper or writing a software application, that changes as you get into it. So the idea at GitLab is to iterate, to release the minimum viable product. So the basic skeleton of an idea, to get it out in front of customers, get it out in front of users, get it out in front of our teams, even to just try it out and see how that works. And that ties into the last value of transparency. So everything on GitLab is public. With a couple of exceptions, you can find everything out about our company, about our product, about our work processes. It really gives you an advantage in the marketplace because everything's out there. There's none of this, well, we thought about doing this, but we're not. Or we say we do this, but we don't. We're transparent. So anyone can go out there to about.gitlab.com and look at all of our handbook, all of our technical documentation. You can't buy your way up into higher echelons of being on the in crowd. In fact, when I got this job, one of the guys that recommended me to this position sent me a link to the interview process, and I was like, this feels dishonest. I feel like I'm cheating because I have all the answers right here. So I had to give a technical demo for one of my interviews, and I had exactly the demo and a YouTube video of someone else doing the same demo. So I went in and learned the product. I learned the demo and was able to talk through it. So you kind of feel like you're cheating a little bit, but all the information's out there. So all those values sound great on paper, but what's really important is it can't be a standalone practice. It can't just be words on a website. A lot of places just throw some values on a page and call it good, and then they never look at those again. But GitLab practices these values every single day. It has to be cultural. It has to be something that you live. And that's one of the reasons why the hiring process at GitLab is so intensive, because you've got to fit the culture to be successful. And I don't say that to rule people out. I say that because if you don't think the same way, then you're not going to be able to collaborate well over a remote space. And being all remote, success depends on the availability of information. Because if you're working in Australia and your other team members in London, you're almost literally on opposite sides of the globe. So you're not going to be able to communicate that easily. In fact, it could be 24 hours. It could be a 24-hour cycle between when you ask a question and when you get an answer. So it's because of that everything has to be public. That information has to be readily available, and we value asynchronous communication. So if you can have a Slack conversation, or if you can create an issue on a project board, that's so much better, because that information will asynchronously be available versus synchronous, like what we're doing now, where at a specific time on a specific date at a specific place or Zoom channel, we have to come together at a time and place that works for everyone. But having that asynchronous communication gives us an advantage. So where can you find some of this information? Well, GitLab is everywhere. We've got two different Twitter feeds. There's GitLab, and then there's GitLab status for GitLab.com. There is on YouTube, we have two channels. We have GitLab, which is kind of the official release channel, and then there's GitLab Unfiltered. You can actually go out to the different teams and departments within GitLab, and you can watch team meetings. So my team had a call just a couple of days ago that was recorded and will be posted in the next day or so on YouTube. And that serves a few purposes. That keeps us honest because we're a transparent company, and by sharing that information with others, we can remain transparent, and we can stay honest, and people in our community can call us out if we're off about something. But it's also great because it maintains that asynchronous communication. So if you're on a team that seems to cluster in one time zone, and you're several hours removed, they could be having a meeting at 5 a.m. your time. But because that meeting is recorded and posted, you can go back later and watch it. It was great the other day. I had a doctor's appointment that conflicted with an internal team meeting, and I literally came home, heated up some lunch, sat down, opened up YouTube, hit watch at time and a half speed, and I was able to catch up on that meeting. And I wasn't able to contribute live, but I had all the information that was shared. And if you go to blog, I think it's blog.gitlab.com. If you just search for GitLab blog, we actually have a blog that is fairly active. There's usually 1 to 2 posts. There's more accurately, there's probably about 5 or 6 posts a week or so. So you can go and see what we're working on. You can see us interview other customers, other people. You can talk to or you can see interviews from, like right now there's a series going on about meeting our security team. So you can pick up industry trends. You can learn more about GitLab, the culture. You can learn about some of the initiatives, some of the releases. And that's one of the major things that we talk about on the blog is there's a monthly release post released on the 22nd of every month with the new version. So you can actually go and see what all the changes were. There's shout outs to community contributors who came up with a feature or major bug fix. You can go read those release notes publicly on our blog. I mentioned our handbook. So not only are our value pages public, but our roadmap to IPO. So GitLab's privately held right now, but in November of 2020, GitLab is going to IPO, and you can actually see our roadmap for that. You can see our growth plan. You can see what positions we're hiring for. You can read their handbook pages, so you can kind of understand how that team works. You could go look up commercial solutions architect in our handbook, and you can see exactly what my job description is and some of the tools that I use on a daily basis. I don't recommend this as light reading because currently the GitLab handbook is over 2,000 pages and growing and changing every single day. So as I mentioned, even our roadmap is public. You can see our previous releases, and then you can see what each phase of the development lifecycle is working on for the next release and the release after that. One disclaimer about that, though, is the farther into the future you get, the less accurate it's going to be, just because GitLab focuses on iteration. And if something that we're working on isn't panning out, or it's taking longer, or maybe a different feature was upvoted, so more people were interested in one feature over another, that roadmap is going to change. But the upcoming releases page is constantly updated. So I mentioned that you can actually see GitLab's code because the repository is open source. So you can actually go out there and see the pipelines that are running. You can see what scans are being ran. You can go in and make changes. You can read merge requests, and even the conversations on those merge requests are public. So it happens from time to time, but you can actually go in and see arguments between developers about, well, we should use this algorithm over that algorithm. Well, no, that's not a good idea, and here's why. You can actually read and comment on those discussions. Actually, that slide's out of place, but yeah, we talked about the handbook being open as well. So the one question I get asked most often when I talk to people about working for GitLab is, doesn't that get lonely? Well, yes and no. Some people call them challenges. I see them as not so much challenges, but as something to keep an eye out for. It can get lonely. You can feel isolated when you're in deep working on some technical issue, trying to help a customer through what they're working on. But GitLab has got built into their culture, built into their schedule, some ways that we work on fixing that. As a member of the sales team, I'm invited every quarter to a different city for what we call QBRs, their quarterly business reviews, and we'll talk to the sales team about what their wins were, what their losses were, what their pain points are, and how as a solutions architect, how as the technical arm, I can help improve their experience so that they can do a better job of serving our customers. GitLab, I mentioned New Orleans. GitLab gets together every 9 months for what we call Contribute, and it's kind of our internal company conference. So it's a chance for everyone to get together at some locale and do some on-the-job training. Do some we get an update on the business from our CEO, from our leadership team. But then over the weekend, sometimes families will join as well, and we'll do sightseeing, we'll do touristy kind of things together. You meet up with different people and have breakfast and lunch with folks that you didn't know before. You've got dinners with your teams, and it's a chance to get together and really spend some one-on-one time. So there were some people I worked with for 5 months that I finally met in person when the company got together in New Orleans. Monday through Thursday, we have a daily group call. So that's at 10:30 Central Time every day. The entire company can log into a Zoom call, and there's a daily agenda of people that have joined the company, people that are getting bonuses or promotions, new releases or information that's coming about the upcoming release. There's occasionally there's funnier tidbits, like one of our engineers was doing updates on the NHL playoffs, so hockey. And then after the official company call agenda is finished, then we do what we call group calls. And as you can imagine, with over 700 people working for GitLab, it's really hard to know everyone. So group calls are a way to break down the company in a slightly different, almost randomized sort of way. So there's a number of groups that have no more than 30 people, and on any given day, there's usually about 6 or 8 people that join these group calls, and there's usually a seed question. So usually something like what's your favorite drink, or what's the most remote location you've ever been to. And it's just a chance to get to know different people. And so every 2 months, those groups, half of each of those people, or half of each of those groups, rotate to a different group, so that you're constantly meeting new people. And in fact, one day in New Orleans, I had lunch with my call group. So people from Germany and London and Atlanta and all over the place got together, and we had lunch, and it was great because we had like a group call in person, and we got to meet in person and have a conversation. It was a great experience. Excuse me. So why be all remote? There are these obstacles to watch out for. There's, we're usually very adamant about keeping track of our people, making sure that folks are active and not feeling too left out. But with using these tools, and even meeting as a company once every 9 months, we have lower company costs. We can hire anywhere. We get better talent. GitLab has a very generous expense reimbursement plan. So I was able to get new monitors, new desk and office chair, and GitLab paid for it all, because even though they replaced pretty much all of my office furniture for me, it's still cheaper to do that for their employees than to have a central office where you have to pay for security, you have to pay building maintenance, you're paying for landscaping, utilities, all that kind of thing. So GitLab is big on reimbursing for expenses, and they've even been helping me pay for expenses to get me out to conferences like Southeast Linux Fest and Linux Fest Northwest, which I got to go to both of those this year. because I went there not only for myself, but also, doing some market research with GitLab, talking to people about how they're using our product. And even doing meetups like this, to where I can talk to people and kind of help spread the word of what GitLab is, and 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 not just to make more sales, but to be a better steward of the open source community. Because one of the reasons why I came to work for GitLab, one of the things I love about them is that they support the open source community. When Microsoft bought GitHub, many projects flocked to GitHub. In fact, right now, I'm pleased to say that both the GNOME Foundation and the KDE team use GitLab to do their desktop and application development and deployment. And there's a whole bunch of other projects that have moved to GitLab for that purpose. And if you're an open source project or an educational institution, you actually get a gold license for free. So our top tier license, you actually can get a license for free for being an open source or education organization. So GitLab is trying in a lot of different ways to give back to the community, to provide free CI/CD support, to provide security scanning and monitoring for tools, as a way to continue to contribute back. So it's not all just self-serving. We're not here, GitLab doesn't go out and buy companies and take apart their intellectual property, their IP, and hide it underneath their logo. GitLab is a steward and a participant within that community. So that being someone who's open source minded, being an advocate and a passionate user of open source tools, I'm really proud to work for a company that's open core. I'm really proud to work for a company that's trying every month to be a better steward and work with not only our own open source community of developers and contributors, but to also give back. And in fact, that's one of the reasons why I run Linux on my laptop. That's a reason why I use tools like LibreOffice and Firefox, because those are also other tools that like GitLab are being good stewards of the community. And so not only is GitLab open source, not only was this presentation developed using open source, but my talk itself is actually open source. You can actually go out to gitlab.com, you can go to my namespace, and you can go to my talks project, and you can get the slide deck, you can get links to some of the pages that I've talked about. And I've been asking people for feedback, or if I've got a couple of other talks that might be of interest. And if one of those talks, I've got one on getting started with open source, and if those talks are something that you can use, by all means, it's open source. Take them, use them, change them. By all means, just use open source. Be an advocate for this. So I built in a little bit of a pause here, to ask if anyone had any questions about GitLab itself, the company or the product, and then see, I'm doing actually fairly decent on time, I think. So so I'd be more than happy to take some questions about this, and then we could jump into a more technical demo.
What is the difference between the gold license and the standard license?
So GitLab has, call it, 5 different tiers of pricing. There's the community edition of our product, on one end of the spectrum, and then it goes from I think it's bronze, silver, and gold, or there's starter, and then bronze, silver, and gold. So with each tier, it's targeting a different type of use case. So the idea being that the community edition has all the tools built into it that an individual needs to run. Then when you get into starter, maybe you're a small team, or maybe you're maybe you're an organization that only has 1 or 2 projects that they're developing. So the starter edition is just $4 a month per user, and that's either for GitLab.com, or you can actually host your own instance of GitLab. But then when you get up to like gold, then you're talking about multi-project pipelines. So you're talking about taking multiple projects and running their deployment all at the same time, because you have all these interdependencies between all of your projects. Or if you're using microservice, or maybe you're using functions as a service, like a serverless model. You need that higher level of visibility. There's more dashboards and reporting in the gold tier. And the idea being that gold is more directly effective for large enterprises. But one of the interesting things about our pricing model is it's all public. There's none of this whole if you want to license, you have to call me and we'll discuss pricing then, because you always hear that if you have to ask how much it costs, you probably don't want to know. But one of the interesting things, as an added tidbit, I work on the commercial side, so I'm small, medium, and mid market business. So anywhere, I'll talk to anyone from like 10 seats up to 1,999 seats, is kind of my space that I work in. And we're actually seeing smaller companies, in the mid market space even, that are buying gold licenses, because GitLab is that single application for your entire pipeline. So you can manage your project, you can track your issues, you can store your code in version controlled Git repositories, uh, you can you can run your security scans, and you can monitor all those different pipelines and applications. So we're actually seeing more and more companies in the mid-market space buying GitLab as a single solution. They're tearing down their Jiras and their Jenkins and their Bamboos and their Circle CIs and their Sonar cubes, and they're instead of shelling out $1,000 here and $1,000 there and $10,000 over here, they're buying GitLab, which is usually cheaper per seat than most of our competition, but we offer so much more.
Is there a way to purchase outright everything and then host it yourself and then you own it forever, or is that what the community edition is? And there are certain features that are part of the paid edition that you just simply can't get.
So right now, the Community Edition and the Enterprise Edition are two separate code bases, but there's an initiative to merge those two code bases into one. So essentially, you could go out, install Community Edition, and that would have just the free and open source features of GitLab, which is about 80 to 85% of the actual application. So 80 to 85% is actually free and open source. And the caveat is with most open source projects that have company backing, they don't have any technical support. So there's no one at GitLab that you could call or create a ticket with to get support. We do, however, have IRC channels. You can sometimes you can go out and create an issue and it'll get addressed. It kind of depends on how many other people are having similar issues, but there's no SLA. So the higher up you go, the more rapid of a response you can get from a support person. In fact, in the higher tiers, both in enterprise and mid-market, you get assigned a technical account manager. So a TAM, someone whose job it is to, once every 30 days or whatever, to check in with you and see if everything's working okay, or if not, then helping you walk through the process of getting actual technical support people on the line to help you through that. So right now, if you start with the Enterprise Edition, you start with like the starter tier. At any time, you can actually go in and upgrade to a higher tier license, and it just unlocks that code. It just makes those features visible. So if you're using the Enterprise Edition, you can go in and I think if you're doing upgrades, you have to go in and you have to go through the sales team to get your license upgraded. But first time out, you can actually go to gitlab.com right now and purchase a license and throw it on a company credit card. So it's a question of how much support do you need? How much technical support and how much of a turnaround do you need from a support perspective?
Obviously,
I was just wondering, would you say that when you purchase like the paid version, is the primary advantage in that, so to speak, 15% more software you get, or is the primary advantage all the assistance you get, technical support? What's the greater part of the value there?
So I want to put my sales hat on for a second and say it depends. It really depends on your needs. I've seen companies that the only reason why they switched to a paid model is because of that, because they had some kind of an issue where they needed support. They don't need a lot of the more enterprise type features. But then I've seen other companies that they may have one issue when they're trying to get something set up. but then after that, GitLab just runs. They run their updates, like a week after they're released every single month religiously, and they use the heck out of those enterprise features, but never use support. So it really just depends on the company, on how much time they spend taking care of their GitLab instance. So it really just does depend.
Okay.
Obviously, I'm not asking about you specifically, but in general, you've got some students here that are looking at graduating college and other people that might be looking for different careers. What kind of how do I phrase this point? What kind of pay scale does GitLab offer people who are looking at becoming remote employees?
So GitLab overall pays fairly well, based on just market research, just general market research. And that's not something I looked into all that closely, because honestly, they were going to pay me more than I was making at the time when you factor in commission. But that also varies. One of the reasons for being a remote company is we can target certain areas, so we can kind of spread our reach. Because if, like for instance, one of our small business sales teams actually lives about an hour outside Grand Forks, and she had a couple of last minute things come up. Otherwise, she was going to be on site to kind of be the physical presence of GitLab. But there's a lot that gets factored in, and it's a lot of lot of people ops type black magic that goes into calculating who gets paid what. A lot of it's based on experience and kind of the typical your typical considerations for position. But one of the unique challenges that GitLab has is being from different countries, being in different lifestyle situations, like poor choice of words, but like whether you live in a rural area versus in the city, and versus say Los Angeles or Grand Forks or Kansas City. So there's a lot of those factors that come into play when depicting salary. But overall, GitLab's very competitive when it comes to salary. Benefits are outstanding as well. Like I said, not really any set office hours, no set office you have to commute to, unlimited PTO, flexible scheduling, 401k, health insurance, and you actually right now can get shares of GitLab stock in preparation for the IPO next year. So lots of benefits too.
Yeah, I have a couple questions.
Sure.
How does the CI integration work with GitLab? I've been using a lot of stuff with GitHub and Jenkins at my work. How is that different, and what goes on there? I'm curious.
So I'm going to dodge your question, and I'll be transparent about that. I'll talk about that more in the technical demo we've got coming up.
And then you're probably going to dodge this next one. I see you have Docker stuff as well that's integrated right into GitLab and the UI here. I'm curious. I'm just learning about Docker now, so I'm curious how that integrates with some of the stuff that you have, I guess.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Maybe a more accurate description is, instead of dodging your question, I'm just that'll come up in the demo as well.
All right, I think we're good, Eric. If you want to do your product demo,
All right. Yeah.
where we actually see how it works.
Yeah. That's the part that all of us techies want to see is how does this actually work? Okay. There we go. All right. So this is GitLab.com. GitLab.com exists as one of the largest instances of GitLab known to exist, and it is hosted out on GCP on Google Cloud Platform. It is currently being moved into a cloud native type of an installation, but right now it is It is running predominantly as a monolith out on GCP, but some of the newer functions and some of the newer microservices that are built around GitLab are actually running in Kubernetes and in serverless functions and that kind of thing on GCP. So GitLab.com gets you most of the way, most of all the features. GitLab actually started as a self-hosted option. So you spun up your own server and you installed GitLab and it ran inside your data center. Interestingly enough, as that popularity has grown, GitLab also has one-click deployments on GCP, on DigitalOcean, AWS, and I think if it hasn't been released yet, it will be released soon on Azure. So you can go out to the marketplaces for those and just one click spin up, like on DigitalOcean, I spin up a droplet there every so often and just try one random thing out on GitLab and then spin that droplet back down. So it's becoming very predominant across a lot of the different VPS providers. One of the other advantages to running self-hosted versus GitLab.com is that you get a lot of software that's integrated with the self-hosted option. For instance, when GitLab, the company, really started to grow, we set up with Slack because that was kind of one of the only options at the time for asynchronous communication. So instant messaging and threads and communication and that kind of thing. It was kind of the only player at the time. But the self-hosted instances of GitLab actually come with a Mattermost instance, and Mattermost is kind of the Slack open source alternative. So if you spin up your own instance, you also can set up Mattermost. Recently, we also started to include an Elasticsearch instance with the GitLab cluster as well. And so from the GitLab configuration file, you can turn those features on and off as you need them. So there's definitely some thinking up front as to whether you want to host your own instance or if you want to use GitLab.com. Some of the other thoughts behind that might be GitLab.com automatically updates on the 22nd of every month with the newest version, so it's a lot less administrative overhead. But if you're running self-hosted, a lot of companies will wait until kind of that. Like right now, we're on version 12.0, so a lot of companies will wait for that 12.0.1, for that initial flurry of bug fixes to come out, kind of let it cook for a few days before they upgrade. So there's some give and take with self-hosted versus GitLab.com. But for my project demo tonight, I'm on GitLab.com, and I'm actually using Kubernetes integration with a GKE cluster, so Google Kubernetes Engine, which basically a Kubernetes cluster that runs on GCP that Google manages for me, so I don't have to manage that. What you're looking at is a project page within my namespace. It's just a basic Ruby app. If we come down here to operations and environments, I can actually show you what that looks like, what the app itself looks like. And I'll kind of talk through that page here in a minute. So it's probably really hard to see on the TVs you're looking at, but all this Ruby app does is just displays "Hello World" on the screen. So it's kind of the stock application that we all start with a new programming language. So I hate it when I do that. Just a second. So the story goes that we are all called into this meeting. King Noah says that he's tired of our homepage just saying "Hello World." It's unreadable. It's not very brand specific. So we're going to make some changes. So what this demo is going to do, with as few tabs as possible, we're going to actually review the code, review the application, create an issue around that change. We're going to work that issue to completion. We're going to run security scans, and we're going to watch our application actually deploy. So we're going to do all of that from within GitLab.com. So I may be using multiple tabs, but I'm not leaving the GitLab application. Why do I labor that point? Well, it's simple. When you're working between tools like Jira and GitHub and Jenkins and SonarQube, and you just start listing out all these applications that do these one or two very specific tasks, you run into a problem. You run into what we call context switching, and that's not GitLab. That's psychology. Context switching is a performance hit that you take anytime you change tasks. So if you're changing screens, if you're changing from one task to another, and it doesn't have to be technology related. If you go from folding laundry to cooking dinner, that's a context switch. And studies have shown it can take up to 23 minutes to recover from a context switch. So every time you change from one application to another, from doing one task to another, you're losing the better part of 23 minutes every time that happens. So GitLab has a singular UI. It's got the same style throughout. It's got similar layouts. All of our merge requests. It sounded like someone just fell in the hallway. But all of our merge requests, security scans, all of that shares very similar UI styles. So while you may be switching tasks, we try and do everything that we can as a product to help alleviate that context switch, to get you back to work even quicker, so you can kind of hit that stride. When you're not being affected by context switching, you had that feeling. We typically call it, you feel like you're in the zone. You're making progress. You're fixing bugs. You're writing new features. You're writing new documentation. So you want to hit that stride as quickly as possible. So that's kind of why I labor that point a little bit. So let's jump into our issue board. So we're in this meeting. We're having a conversation about how we're talking about how our homepage is terrible. It doesn't represent our brand, our company. It doesn't do a good job of communicating what we're doing. So what you're looking at is an extremely pared down issue board. So maybe you've heard of Agile or Kanban or some of these newer development styles that get away from the MS project life that we used to all live in, where it was just drop down after drop down after drop down of we've got all these tasks to do. Instead of, it's more of a flow. So you've got your backlog. So these are issues that have been created. Someone might have just thrown an issue out on your board, but they haven't been addressed. So that's your backlog. Your to-do column is the next one over. So that's something that's been triaged. Someone has looked at it, they've kind of qualified it of, okay, this is an actual issue, this is something that needs to be looked into, but no one has necessarily picked it up, and it's not being actively worked at the time. That's for the doing space. Someone has actually gone out, grabbed that issue, and is working it. The idea is to work on as few of issues to completion as possible. So instead of having 6 or 7 issues you're working all at once and you're context switching between all of those, don't let anyone fool you. Multitasking is a myth. So someone who says that they're good at multitasking is just better at handling that context switching than someone else. So that's for our doing column. And what's interesting is, if we were to blow this up to add more tasks and different types of tasks to this, you could actually see different labels. So like this one was listed as an enhancement. It could be a bug fix. You can add different labels to help you categorize, and they're color coded. You can modify those color codings so that you can very quickly look at your board, see who's working on what type of work they're working on. If we're in an agile environment where we're doing weekly sprints, you could actually add more of these columns so that every time you had a new issue, or every time you had a new week, you could have a new column. So this is the doing column's what I'm doing this week. The next column is what I'm doing the week after, and then the week after that. So you can actually track those. You can actually track those in an agile fashion, and you can actually drag and drop issues from one column to another. So let's kind of walk through that. We're going to refresh our homepage. Noah doesn't like it. We're going to fix that. So we're going to put an issue on our board, and we're going to come in here and populate it. Hopefully it's a little easier to read now. So GitLab supports Markdown throughout, for documentation, for comments, for descriptions. So what's really cool, though, is that GitLab doesn't just do Markdown; it does GitLab flavored Markdown. So it's your standard quotes, your standard item lists, your standard code quote, all those kinds of things. But then I can also tag other issues, or I can mark an issue to be closed if a certain action is reached. So let's add a couple of markdown items here. We're going to add HTML tags, and then we are going to reword the header. So now I've actually got subtasks within this issue, and I can mark them complete. And then next time I refresh the screen, it'll actually update, showing that I've actually completed some of those tasks. I can come down here. I can add comments. And I can actually start threaded conversations with different people on my team about how best to solve this issue, or I can actually cite specific parts of code, so that I can go in and so I can have a visible conversation about that. So we've gone through and we've established our issue. It's been triaged. So I'm going to assign it to myself. If you're familiar with Agile, you know that Agile sprints are based off of a weight system, usually 1 to 10. So depending on how difficult this is, I can actually add in a weighted value, and then that gets updated within the column. So for each sprint, I can see how many issues are in that sprint and what the total weight of all those issues are. And I can use that to kind of make sure that I'm not overwhelming my team with too much work. So now that we've assigned it, we've given it a weight, we're not going to set a due date because it's kind of as soon as possible. Now that we've triaged and written out our issue, we're actually going to move it over to the doing column. And notice that each time I drag that issue over, it updates my label. So I can track where I am in that process from within the ticket. One of the advantages of using GitLab as a single application for your entire development lifecycle is that I've got this history right here within my issue. I can see who assigned the issue to who. I can see date and timestamps. So I can really track this issue from start to finish, and I can get some in-depth look at what's going on. And in fact, here in the next phase, we're going to create a merge request, and you're going to see how much more powerful that becomes, having all of this within a single application. So we've gone through the project planning, and we've gone through the issue triaging portion of the life cycle. Now we're actually ready to get in and do some work. But to do that, we need a workspace. We need somewhere to do all of this. So we're right from this issue. I didn't change applications. I didn't log into a different server. I didn't forget my YubiKey or forget my password and have to go in and change all that. It's all within the same application, all within the same interface. So I just created myself a workspace. So if you're used to developing within Git, you're familiar with what's called a feature branch. If you're not, then the quick and dirty of it is you kind of have two basic types of repositories. You have a master branch, and that's where your production code lives. So whatever you want your customer or your end user to see, that lives in master. You want to do your development inside of a feature branch, and that feature branch is supposed to be limited to a specific change. So one particular function or one particular enhancement. You want those feature branches to be short-lived and very, very small. So you can make changes from master, and you can compare A to B very, very quickly, because the more changes you make within a merge request, the more changes you make within a feature branch, the harder it's going to be when you merge that code back in. How many of us have hit a merge commit and a commit failure, a conflict, and just gone, yep, I don't know how to resolve this. So if you're using very small feature branches, then you can avoid that issue. So now I've gone through project planning, I've gone through issue triage, and now I've created myself a safe workspace to make my change from. So now, continuing that single application overtone that we're using in this demo, I can now open an IDE right within GitLab. And as you can tell, it's pretty full featured, just as if I was using Vim with a bunch of plugins, or VS Code, or Eclipse, but all of this is built into my application. It's right here. And I've got color-coded files. I can see what my directories are. And then I can come in here to my server RB file, and I can actually see what my code is. And I've got syntax completion. I've got syntax highlighting, so I can tell that my green text here is a comment very quickly. I can skim through this and see exactly what's going on in my code very quickly. So here's that hello world we want to fix. So our task was to add HTML, revise our header, and as you can see, as I was typing, GitLab is trying to help me complete that syntax, which is really great because if you're like me, you've got 16 different things going on in your head at any one time. So with that command completion and that syntax highlighting, I can make sure that that when I actually do write my code, that it's correct and it does what I want it to do. So now we've made our change. We're ready to push it back to our feature branch, and I can do that right here just by clicking commit. So like a good developer, I'm actually going to go in and leave a commit message, and I updated the server RB file, but I want to be more descriptive. So I want to summarize what I changed. Added HTML, revise the header. So now I've got that information I can track, and I'm going to commit that back to my feature branch. And so from right here, right from my IDE, I'm actually going to commit that code back. How many times have you changed a file using Vim or Eclipse or something and then forgot to push it back to your repository? GitLab helps you avoid that. So now I have no unstaged changes. And if you notice down here at the bottom, it actually gave me a status. So there's a pipeline now with this ID running for this commit ID by, well, me. So you can very quickly see who's making a change to what. So right from my web IDE, I can actually jump into my pipeline. So what's a pipeline? So, and I think this will tie back into the questions that I was asked earlier. So I didn't lie. Here's where you were asking about Docker. So I can actually come in here, and while my Docker container is building, I can actually watch it. Actually, it just finished. I can see how long it ran. I can see the commit ID. I can see what merge request it was tied to. So the question was, how does GitLab integrate with some of these other tools? How does GitLab use Docker? Excuse me. So GitLab uses an open source project called a GitLab runner. And the runner is kind of the worker bee for GitLab. So Jenkins has workers, GitLab has runners. And the runners are updated every month on the 22nd, just like their parent project, but it's completely open source. And GitLab runner is basically just a very, very small Linux instance, usually a Docker container. So anything I can do from the Linux command line, I can do inside of a runner. So in this case, what I'm doing is I'm pulling a Ruby-based Docker container from a repo. I'm doing a fetch of my Git repository, and then I'm building that Docker container with not only the code that's living in this repository, but including the change that we just made to the server RB file. So sure, go for it.
So all these jobs are running in a Docker container on the slave or runner or whatever application app.
So that's great. No, you're fine. That's a great question. In fact, while this part's running, that gives me a great chance to jump over here. So as I mentioned, we support serverless, so functions, short-lived functions, but we also integrate with Kubernetes. And if you're doing any kind of development, if you're looking for a place within IT to get into, Kubernetes and Docker development, that's kind of where things are going. Not much anymore do you spin up a very heavy virtual machine and just run Apache on it, because that's really high overhead. So think about now, instead of spinning up an entire virtual machine with all the security software, all the maintenance requirements of running updates and maintaining disks and hardware, now instead you can spin up a very, very small Linux kernel with just the necessary libraries and then your web server and then your code on top of it. So the images are much smaller. You can spin up multiple of these at any time, and that's done using Kubernetes. So I mentioned that I'm running off of a GKE Kubernetes cluster, but this doesn't just exist in GCP. So if I was doing a self-hosted instance and I'm running, say I've got a home lab and I'm running a Kubernetes cluster in my home lab because I want to learn this stuff, then I can actually connect to an existing Kubernetes cluster, or maybe your company uses AWS or Azure or DigitalOcean. You can actually just grab a few pieces of information, like the CA certificate, the service token. You can grab just a few pieces of information and actually integrate GitLab with Kubernetes. And what GitLab will do when you add a new Kubernetes cluster is it'll create a GitLab namespace, and GitLab will only manage your Kubernetes cluster within that namespace. And so that really becomes effective if you're trying to get up and running quickly. So I had the project and the Kubernetes cluster behind all this took me less than 20 minutes. Most of that was the Kubernetes clusters spinning up on GCP. So I came in, I gave it a base domain, I spun up my Google Kubernetes engine cluster, and then I waited. Once that connection was made, now I can get CPU and memory snapshots just so I can see the overall health of my cluster. From there, I can do one-click installs for a lot of the packages, a lot of the applications that Kubernetes depends on to become a useful tool, basically. So Helm Tiller is think of it as like a package manager for Kubernetes. To get into a Kubernetes cluster, you have to have an ingress point. Think of that as kind of your access point for your application. So the web page that I showed you, this Hello World, is actually running at that IP address underneath this welcome project. I can install Let's Encrypt for certification management. I can install Prometheus, which is a cloud and Kubernetes aware monitoring software. I can install additional runners. I can install tools like Jupyter Hub, which is great for research and scientific reporting and that kind of thing. A great open source project if you're not familiar with it. And then Knative, which is a serverless application. And then I can come in and I can modify my cluster right from here. So I can tell it that I want 6 nodes up and running instead of the default 3. So just one click, I can install all of these applications and get up and running within minutes. So while we've been talking, the GitLab runner has been ran the build, and then it started running all of these security tests. One of the biggest issues that open source sees right now is that it's running pretty much the bulk of the internet. And so it means that all those open source libraries, all those open source components are all out there on hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of web nodes that have public facing IPs. The problem is that open source, like any other software, is prone to security vulnerabilities. So by having security scans built into the process, every time you build a feature branch, it's going to run security scans. So it can actually check and see if you've introduced any new vulnerabilities. It'll do kind of a spell check of your code. So if you've maybe you've called out a variable that's not in use in the code or something, it'll come up in a code quality scan. It'll actually scan your Docker containers to make sure that there aren't any vulnerabilities. So if you're using Alpine images, it'll run a scan of your Alpine container. License management. So if your application is dependent upon open source licensing, you can actually blacklist certain licenses that you don't want to use. So if your application calls to a library that doesn't match your requirements for licenses, that'll get flagged in license management. And then it'll also run SAST and DAST scanning. That's static application scanning and dynamic application scanning. One is run during the build process. The other is run while the application is actually live. It's trying to see if there's any holes it can punch into in your application, any way that it can run any type of SQL injection or buffer overflows, any type of vulnerabilities that are out there. We can actually scan for while your application is running. One of the other advantages to using GitLab and Kubernetes hand in hand is the review app, and this is really exciting. I've been talking to customers lately that are looking at eliminating some of their environments. So if you've been a systems administrator like myself, and I'm sure Noah can attest to this, you've got multiple environments. You've got production, you've got disaster recovery, you've got pre-production or a staging environment, you've got a development environment, you've got God knows how many test environments that were spun up for load testing or QA. So each of these environments is a complete replica of production. So if you have 6 production servers, you can figure that you'll have about 4 times that many servers just for that one application. So the problem with that is it's a lot of overhead, it's a lot of hardware, it's expensive, it's a lot of maintenance effort. So every time a new Linux kernel is released, you have to put it into dev, then put it into test, put it into stage, put it into production. It's very, very heavy. So a review app is actually trying to help cut down on that overhead, especially from an infrastructure perspective. Because if I can spin up a containerized version of my application that is separate from production and run it run it on the same hardware on the same Kubernetes cluster, but have it sandbox so it can't talk to my production database, for instance, so it can't get actual customer data, but I can still test to make sure that my function, maybe it's a shopping cart. I can actually test to make sure that my shopping cart works the way it's supposed to without touching actual production data, but still run it on the same hardware. So what does that look like? Let me go back to that environment screen that I mentioned earlier. So not only does GitLab do deployment, but it also does monitoring. So this is a really simplistic app, and I've only got one pod running. So I've only got one container running my Ruby app. But I can see it here, and I can see that it's green, so I can tell that it's healthy. Maybe I've got an app that has multiple containers running inside a single pod, and maybe I've got multiple pods. So I've got a couple of database instances and multiple web front ends. So maybe I've got multiple Nginx containers. I can see all of those containers right here, and I can get a quick health check of how they're doing. I can check monitoring logs. I can actually get a bash terminal into those containers. So if I need to pull some logs for a weird error that I'm trying to track down, I can actually check that here. But so this is our production environment. So this is that hello world page that I was showing you guys earlier. What's great is these are review environments. So this 8 refresh homepage, that's the issue and the merge request that we've been working through tonight. So that the hello grand forks change that we made to our code, that's now running inside of a container. And I can do the same thing. I can get a bash terminal, I can check monitoring, I can restart that environment so that pulls all of my code fresh, but I can also open that live environment. So now I can compare A to B very quickly. Oh yeah, that looks much better. And now it's even, I can see that we've added HTML tags. I can tell that we've rebranded. So think if you've gone from just a static product page to a product page that actually has a shopping cart, how valuable this kind of a review app might be. So while my pipeline's finishing, I can actually be comparing A to B. And then when I'm satisfied that my review app looks good and I want that in production, I can actually come back here to my merge request. So make note of this work in progress status, which means that's a manual gate. That means that it's not going to get merged into production until I tell it to. So with runners, you can deploy a few different ways. There's work in progress, which is kind of the default. It'll run all of your security scans. It'll run all of your code commits. It'll spin up your review app, but it won't merge into production. I can schedule my runners. So maybe I want to merge all of my changes and roll out to production at midnight. Or maybe I want to do it incrementally. So I want to do 10% of my application and then 25 and 50 and 100 so that I can make sure that when I actually push to production, there's no unforeseen variables that bring my application down. So So from my merge request, I can actually see the feature branch. I can actually look at the pipeline. I can view the review app. I can set additional approvers. So since Noah called our meeting and wanted us to rebrand our website, I could actually add Noah as an approver. So he could go in and he could see the code changes that we made. He could look at the review app and then check a box and says, okay, this is ready to merge. And then I can view an overview of my vulnerabilities that my security scans detected. These are low medium, so it's not going to prevent us from pushing to production, but I can actually pull up a pop-up window that tells me exactly what command failed, and in a lot of cases even give me a solution. It'll even give me a button that creates a new issue to put on our issue board in our backlog, so that I remember to go back and make that change later. Sometimes it's something as simple as just updating a dependency library. But I can do all that from the merge request, and then when I'm satisfied, when I've reviewed my changes, when I've run my commits and checked my review app, I can actually say, yep, all my work is done. And so I can actually delete my source branch and merge that back into production. And then within a few seconds, it actually spins up an additional pipeline that's going to go through a very similar process. But this time, instead of spinning up a review environment, it's going to push to production, and then it's going to monitor that application and look at historical data using different algorithms. It kind of varies from app to app and language to language, but it'll actually watch that application, so that if you merged a change back into production and it introduced some kind of a memory leak, it's going to know, and it'll be able to flag your change, and you can roll that back very quickly. Meanwhile, maintaining all of that visibility that we have within our merge request. But then finally, something interesting happened. That issue number 8 that we were working on, it's not my doing column anymore. It's down here in my completed column, because I've done all the work, I've merged it into production, and within a few minutes, once those security scans are completed, I can refresh this page here, and it won't say hello world anymore. It'll say hello Grand Forks, because we've merged that change back into our production environment. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is GitLab from idea to production.
Awesome.
I have a question.
Sure, shoot.
Regarding the pipeline setup. It looks, from what you showed us, it looks very drag and drop. I've been working with Jenkins some, and it supports usage of, they call it the Jenkins file, where you in terms of you just type it out. Is there any kind of system like that for this, for defining the pipeline?
That's a great question. That's something I didn't actually mention during the demo. So while you have Jenkins files for Jenkins, GitLab has gitlab-ci.yaml. It's not the most easy name to keep track of. But if you look for the gitlab-ci file, it's got all of those. Now, granted, a lot of this is commented out, but what we're looking at here is what's called auto DevOps. And auto DevOps is just a collection of sane defaults from all of our team, all of our customers, all of our community contributors that have all said that these security scans, these build processes, these build arguments all make sense to just basically get up and going. But if we dive in a little bit deeper, we can actually see the call out to a build document, our code quality test, our deploy, our browser performance testing, our DAS scanning. We can actually see that this particular pipeline is calling all of these templated files. So I'm basically just using the defaults. But I can come up here to stages, and we can see each of those phases. So our build, test, deploy, review, DAS, and then into production. But if I were to flesh out these staging or these incremental rollout sections of this code, I can actually set it up to where I'm only rolling out my change to 10% of traffic, and then 25 and 50. So this is all YAML. So it's very easy to read. It's easy to format. It's what we call self-documenting. So the GitLab CI file is kind of the Jenkins file equivalent.
I appreciate that it has a file extension on the end.
that does make life easier.
So my question is, has a great workflow for web UI and web development. How does that change for desktop and embedded applications? And there might not be a good answer. I'm just
So I did everything within the web terminal. We made all of our changes here in the web IDE. But if you're doing UI development and you're version controlling all those with GitLab, anything that I showed you today can be done locally on your system. And what I mean is, if you just are absolutely in love with Emacs, maybe there's a wire loose, and you love Emacs. You can actually do that. You can go in, you can do a Git clone from this repository, clone it down to your local system. You can use Emacs to make your code changes, or whatever UI development software you might be using, and you can make those changes locally. And then you can, when you do the git commit and the git push commands, GitLab knows to listen for those. And so when you do the git push and that code gets pushed back up to the server, it'll actually kick this process off automatically. So you can do it either way. You can do everything from within the web UI, or you can do things locally on your system, and then GitLab will trigger off that git push.
And then what does it do for storing artifacts? So let's say instead of creating a website, it creates an installer and exe that's like, how does it?
Great question. So GitLab has a built-in registry and a package registry. Right now, the major repository or artifact storage that we have is Docker containers, Maven, and I think NPM. There's more in development, and that list is going to grow quite a bit between now and the end of the year. See our roadmap we discussed earlier. But so we're doing more and more for artifact storage. In fact, one of the next things on our list for the operations team is actually to be able to use GitLab as an RPM package repository. So for all of us that have hundreds and hundreds of CentOS packages that we want available internally on our network, you'll actually be able to schedule out runners to go out, pull from public mirrors, and be able to connect your internal servers to your internal GitLab RPM package repository. Something else I've seen people do in a similar vein is using GitLab to manage their infrastructure as code. So if you're using something like Terraform or Ansible, I talked to one customer that I really would love to get a case study from, because they were deploying on AWS. That's what their company wanted to do. That was the buzzword that they fell in love with, and so that's where they deployed their infrastructure. So they actually rebuilt their infrastructure every time they made a change, and they were able to do that using GitLab, the GitLab CI YAML file, and GitLab runners, because inside this YAML file they defined Terraform commands that pulled from their GitLab repository. So they were able to run their Terraform code to stand up new EC2 instances. Then inside the same project, they had Ansible code that would go out and configure and run updates and create the necessary users in that EC2 instance. And then I think it was like a Python application. Then they actually used the built-in Auto DevOps to deploy that Python application and run all the scans. So I've seen people use it for not only for their development, but also for keeping PDF files up to date. So you've always got the latest PDF files available, pulled down. I've seen them use it for infrastructure as code. Also, one of the built-in applications is a built-in wiki, or you can actually create a project as a static HTML repository. And there's actually project templates out there for tools like Hugo and Jekyll. So you can use gitlab.com to schedule the deployment of your blog page, or to version control your website, or to pull from multiple different projects to populate different parts of your website. So I've seen different people come up with really creative ways of using GitLab. What other questions?
Awesome, man. Thank you very much, Eric. We really appreciate your time. Feel free to give a plug to your various different things and ways people can get a hold of you and all that.
Yeah, so I am Eric the IT guy. You can find me on Twitter. Predominantly, I'm also on Mastodon under the Linux Rocks the Linux Rocks instance. Let's see. I've got a blog, a website, and plans for podcasts that have been kind of on hold the last few months with all the travel and the move and just kind of keeping up with the day to day. But those things are still in the works. Yeah, just look up Eric the IT guy and track me down. And like I said, feel free to use this demonstration. I can make this recording available. However we want to make sure that those resources are available for all of you.
Hey, Eric, I have one quick question before you go.
Sure.
I think I heard GitLab is federated. So if I host my own service, would other people be able to find it from the main instance that you guys host?
GitLab isn't federated in like the Mastodon sense, but GitLab.com is a multi-tenant instance of GitLab. So it is a GitLab installation, but there's multiple individual contributors, different customers, and there's public and private repositories hosted out there. So if you go to GitLab.com and you search for the name of a project, like I can't think of one off the top of my head, but you can actually go to GitLab.com and do code searches for different projects, and that's if you have the appropriate permissions, or if the repository is public, you can actually track that down on GitLab.com. But I don't think there's any. I don't think there's anything on the roadmap right now to build in federation into GitLab.
And he's available on Telegram. He's in all the various. I think you're in like every Telegram group known to man. So.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, Eric, thanks a lot. We really appreciate it, and tell all of your friends at GitLab how much we appreciate the help and the awesome work that they're doing.
Yeah, for sure. And if the talk on the culture, the product demo struck your interest, one more shameless plug. GitLab is hiring. We are trying to almost triple in size this year. When I started, there was less than 400 people that work for GitLab, and we're now over 700, and we're continuing to grow. So there's a bunch of positions for implementation engineers, SREs. There's more solutions architects type positions. So the demo that I just walked you through, and some of the Q&A that we just did, you can do that on a daily basis, like I do. So it's a great opportunity to meet different people, get exposed to different types of technology. So if you're interested, like I said, GitLab's always hiring.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Eric.
Well, thanks for having me, and everybody keep in touch.
Yep, for sure, man.
All right, have a good night.